So then I ended up being a clinician. And I think, Liz, this is where you and I first interacted, was while I was doing more similar work to that. And like, I mean, back to the whole introvert extrovert thing, that's a piece of it. It's not the whole thing, but I am introverted, and that the idea of being one-on-one with another person, especially a person who's in crisis or having severe like emotional experiences, to be in that space with them energetically all day. And especially when I was like in my first clinical job, it was literally, that was all it was. It was all day, 9 to 5. Well, I guess I was in a school, so it was like 8 to 2. And you're like, all day, every day, just one-on-one with an individual. And that very quickly I realized, okay, this isn't really what I want to do. What is social work then without that? And I just didn't know. And I think I have come around to, like, it was a lot of up and downs, and working with you, Liz, on that experience of just what does that mean? And this doesn't even like, I didn't even touch on the whole like identity side of it. It was more just like, well, this is draining me and I can't do it anymore. But that's a whole other conversation, is like, what did that mean for me personally to be like, I don't want to do clinical work as a social worker? Because you start to tie that, like, this is the best way that you can like use your skills, or the best way that you can like help people within the field is by this direct service one-on-one experience. But so that's just a general idea of what kind of I've gone through in this topic. I'm interested to hear your thoughts, though.
Yeah, it's so crazy as I'm listening to you. I'm realizing how much this has been an issue and has come up. There's been crossroad after crossroad on this topic. And even though I told you, hey, listen, I want to do this topic, even at that time, I wasn't realizing. So I'm listening to you and reflecting at the same time. And I'm just realizing how many times I have battled between figuring out what I am going to do, right? And some of it is, I think if you're someone who's multi-talented, you have the challenge of even deciding which of the talents, or if you're multi-talented and or multi-passioned, which are going to be the thing. And, one of the things early on, so for me, with this background, this clinical background, having done counseling and all that stuff early on, and then going over to the business side, and learning how much I appreciate business and strategy and all that good stuff, and getting really good at that. Then I always felt like I was either, if I was in the clinical type setting, then the business strategy side of me was dying and not getting an opportunity to live. And then if I was on the business strategy side of things, then the clinician side of me, the human side of me wasn't able to have its space. So it was years ago when I discovered there's a thing called industrial and organizational psychology, and I was like, it was relieving to me, just because I'm like, oh, this is a thing, because I kind of felt like I was crazy because I would like bounce back and forth between the two. And so just discovering there was such a thing that really focuses on business and human behavior, organizational behavior and human behavior, and the intersection of those was very relieving for me. But the other battle that went on regardless of that relief was, being good historically, expertise in human behavior hasn't really been very much appreciated. And so I'm dope at business and consulting and strategy. And so it's like, oh, you get more attention and respect if you say you're a consultant, if you do organizational consulting, than if you say you're a clinician. So for a long time, and it's like I went through rotations of it, right? Where I would like push into do a whole bunch of organizational consulting work. And while I love the work itself, I don't love the fact that so many organizations hire you to come in and then they don't do what you ask them to do. And you realize that they just want to put a band-aid on a bullet wound, and this is really just more for show. And I'm over here like passionate about it. and then I would kind of like fall out of it. Then I'd go back do some clinical stuff, but then the business side of me, you know what I mean? So I just went through this rotation over time. And then I've had times where I still like we're in a world now where my skill sets and our skill sets as human behavior experts, right, are being appreciated more than ever. I think COVID put everyone on notice that our human reality. I don't care what you're doing in business, you're still a human, and people are like, "Ooh, it's heavy," right? So we're starting to move towards that, but I still sometimes struggle internally with whether or not I lean into even the language I use. Like, are they going to appreciate and respect it if I don't say and do the thing that's most respected? And then I had to be honest with myself that it wasn't just whether or not other people would respect it. It was like, would I honor myself? Like, do I give myself as much kudos for doing good clinical work as I do when I can say I'm doing organizational consulting for said top 100 Fortune 100 company, right? And so some of the esteem issues start creeping in there. And so that just has been a vacillation that I've dealt with most of my career. And then this last experience that led me to say we need to talk about this was not just in the career itself, but how you go about it, right? So I am a newly discovered introvert at 42 years old, and I have been wrestling with myself to try to do things. It's not necessarily the career choice itself, but how to go about hitting the highest levels of success. And we know you ain't nobody and you ain't nothing if you ain't doing social media all the time. Well, I freaking don't like being on social media all the time. I just don't. And I definitely don't want to sit here and talk to you about and tell you all the things I'm doing because I'm private, and I don't know why you would want to know that, right? So like that's just how I see it. I don't judge other people who are into that, but I'm just not. So what I realized is between trying to force certain social media activity and going about extensive networking and being on the scene all the time, I literally drained myself, and I hit a wall a couple months ago where I literally was empty. And that's how I discovered I was an introvert, because I didn't realize how much I can't do that. Like I can't do that. And so just coming to that point of like, I literally recently gave myself permission. We're not going to do the things that everyone says you have to do in order to be successful if it's going to make us feel like we're nearly dead, right? So there's this decision that I made. I truly, now that I've kind of relieved myself from that, I truly believe that I'll still reach all of the heights that I plan on reaching, but I'll do it my way, right? And it's the way that works for me. And then, as I'm thinking, I'm talking to you and I'm coaching myself on the inside. Well, like, yeah, the best results come when you are aligned with yourself, when you are at your best. And that kind of brings me to the conversation when we do the cup of joy. We always talk about the intersection of, right? The intersection of our work life and our personal life, the intersection of our career sphere and our emotional well-being sphere. And I would say, I had gotten to a point where I was going so hard and trying to do the things that just don't really rock with me. And so even though I was getting outcomes in the career sphere, I was literally going backwards really fast and didn't see it until I was at zero in my spiritual and emotional spheres. Like I just was empty. So, just another reminder, and this is again why we do Joy Society the way we do, is bringing together all of these spheres to discuss them, because we're only one human, right? And when we're forcing outcomes and doing this and that, I mean, don't get me wrong, everybody who knows me knows that I'm here for sacrifice and going hard, but there's a difference between that and just making yourself miserable, doing things that just don't rock with you. And then to your point on, I had never really thought about it until you said it, like that we're making career choices at 18. Because that, I mean, hell, you got to get up in school unless you want to be one of those 10-year seniors, right?
Yeah.
change your major. But we were talking in the connection session recently about one of our members who is in a certain career, and she's like, can't barely can find a job, and all the things she thought she wanted to do. A, it's been hard to find openings, and B, the pay isn't good. And I think about helpers, social workers, and others who, are just dead set on a certain career, but it's like, you are guaranteeing you're going to be broke for the rest of your life too. So I mean, speaking of interactions and intersections, like that's a tough one, and I think a lot of those in the helping profession just won't even give themselves permission to think about doing something different, because then they start, kind of judging themselves to say like, oh, I'm not a caring person if I'm going over here to make money when the world is hurting and people are dying and people are hungry, and whatever else. So
Yeah,
what would you say about the interaction and the intersection?
yeah, the intersection, I think that's a good point. I think so. We consider financial well-being to be one of the equal spheres when you look at the 8 main spheres of success. And my boyfriend and I talk about this a lot because, like, so he studied finance and ended up not going into finance, and he ended up going into almost a helping profession. So it's um, like we talk about how, as like a college student, like you just don't always you just can't fully understand the like what it means to choose a career financially.
Mhm.
And a lot of times that's not always a bad thing, because it lets you decide, like, in some ways it lets you like really decide based on what you are most interested in. Like, for instance, my social work experience, like I was actually like genuinely most interested in that work. And it wasn't because then I just didn't know. I didn't know what it meant to be a social worker. I didn't really know what it meant to like find a job in social work. I didn't know what kind of pay that would mean for me in my life, and like what my financial status would be. But I genuinely liked the topic and what I was learning. And so I think, yeah, it impacts you though, in all of the spheres. I mean, financially, we've been talking about, just because like the helping professions are like known to not have a lot of like financial security. And that is something that I became aware of once I was like well out of school, even out of grad school. I mean, I think they tell you that, but it's like, do you know what that means for you in your life?
And I do want to throw out there, just because, you can kind of like heavily focus on one end of the teeter-totter. The clients, some of the clients that I coach are crushing it financially, right? They're I mean, all of them are, right? But to the flip side, right? Whether or not they love what they do, and whether or not, I mean, and I don't think you always have to love what you do, but but they're like, when you're to the point of miserable, but you're successful